these windows, don't those look like two horns and two eyes?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that look like more like a devil worship than a Christian church?
No. and if you open the draperies, you'll see what I call the cat window.
And I thought that immediately when I saw that. It looks like a lion, doesn't it?
You got it.
Yeah.
But anyway, they must have sold, or got their donations because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But these are not. But all the rest of them have little plaques, recognition, probably for donors, right?
And actually, they should have been put in the little space in the window. That's what that space is for, is the donor.
Yeah, a nice little article for that.
I would say the plaques have been put up after the windows were put in.
If we had, I don't know, maybe there's some way.
That one right there is after the first minister of the church.
Yes, Reverend Roll, right?
Not one, he was,
Hi, Margaret.
he was the first.
Hi, Margaret. I don't know if we can. We might be able to cut it out of lucite or cut the letters out and actually do a dedication in each one of those spaces because they do look kind of empty.
What would be fun?
We got you tied now.
Is to get a little bio on each of these. Just
Yeah.
a little few sentences.
Yeah.
That'd be a nice article for the lead.
Yep.
The audience
To do
now
a
is the tie that we got.
We're talking about the little brass tags under these windows. There's one right here, and then all of these are covered, which probably was a fundraising back in the these do not have it. This one and all those two.
Yeah, my dad paid for little churches.
Any of those people all before your time, the ones
Oh,
flags?
Those are original people of the church.
Yeah, sure.
So it's an old church.
You guys were ready.
My aunt's house, my aunt had theirs. They had a meeting yesterday.
I remember
This was Lawrence. I'm married Lawrence, but I don't know Lola Lawrence. Okay.
the wedding family that was grocery store town.
Okay, knows who these people are. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Former.
Okay, we'll be starting as soon as we finish our pre-church run through. What we're doing is checking. We have dedications on our windows, our stained glass windows. They're little plaques, so what we're going to do in the future is expand on those and maybe bring those to people's attention and maybe find some way to actually post it on the window. So, welcome to New Madison First Universalist. This is the first kind of nice spring day I can remember for a while. It's a little breezy, it's not so hot. It feels like summer used to feel back in the old days. Do we have any announcements? Church board, are we doing this month or not?
We will be, we haven't decided on the day, but we'll do our annual meeting and church board meeting with our financial review from last year, what have you. That'll be coming up, and I'll have a date for you next week.
And probably we'll do it on a Sunday.
Maybe the middle Sunday when,
Well, what the idea is rather than come on a special thing, we'll do it after church so people don't have to
Yes.
make a special trip.
yes.
So, anybody know what the topic is going to be for today?
Prayer.
Prayer. I'll give you a little prelude. My wife is doing the interim ministry at New Carlisle Church of the Brethren. She has started a thing. Well, she's been doing it, but now she's kind of talking. She's voiced it. She's out loud to me, which kind of struck me. She goes through the sanctuary because they don't really have church attendance. There's not a lot of people in the church because of the virus shutdown, which parenthetically is starting again. The virus is getting stronger and stronger, and now the new CDC guidelines have come out to wear masks, even if you've been vaccinated in public places, because of all the people who don't. The new COVID virus, the new strain, is 1,000 times, my understanding is 1,000 times more infective than the old one. It's actually more infective than chickenpox. And if you're of my age group, everybody in my age group had a chickenpox, so there's no way to escape that. So you need to wear, even if you had your vaccination, you need to protect yourself because you can have those virus particles and spread them to other people. Even if you don't get sick yourself, you can be spreading it to other people. So you need to take precautions for that. I digress, as usual. When she walks through the sanctuary, she has started picturing where people used to sit in the sanctuary and doing a moment's, I don't know what to call it, contemplation, prayer, awareness. And I'm thinking that is something that we could do here at New Madison. Not just me, but everybody. When you come in the sanctuary, you can kind of imagine the people, and particularly the people that used to be here all the time, and maybe give them a few thoughts and spread some good thoughts and support for those people who are not here and for the people who are here. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is investigating prayer. This is the Trite Standard. It's a guy, it's a sunrise or a sunset, and he's on one knee. So we'll go on with that. Prayer can take many forms, and many religions have prayer. This is an example of course, Muslim prayer. They are just as devout, and they have their different traditions than we do. Let's do a centering. I think we've talked about this, and Kenny and I think we're going to ring our bell rather than have a little chime. I liked the tone of that last week, and I kind of like the idea if anybody has positive or negative thoughts on that. So I'm going to give you a little prayer, a little meditation prayer, and we're going to ring the bell for a moment of silence. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with the light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. That's by Wendell Berry, who's a Kentucky author and a proponent of living naturally with the world in harmony. So we'll have a moment of silence with our bell tone. And I think Buddha is a perfect illustration for that. So we lucked out on that. All right, our prelude. How can I keep from singing? Get out of that meditation and stand up. For our chalice lighting, we have another meditation prayer type statement. The grasses stilled with light teaches stillness. Old stones suffer with memory, teaching suffering. Blossoms humble with beginning teach humility. Parents of all manners of species secure their young, teaching caring. Ants crawling on the ground teach limitation. Eagles soaring in the sky teach freedom. Leaves dying in the fall teach resignation. Seeds rising in the spring teach regeneration. Melting snow forgets its life, teaching us to forget ourselves. Dry fields weep in the rain, teaching us to remember kindness. And that's adapted from a Ute or a Ute, which is an Indian tribe prayer. May we, your children, prove able and grateful pupils of all your teaching. All right. Our opening hymn is 159 in your hymnal. This is my song.
Can I enter?
And skies are everywhere as blue as mine. We're going to skip the affirmation and we go to children's story. Prayer of who? Evangelical fundamentalists. The ones you see with their hands in the air. And why do they have their hands in the air? I don't know. Could be they're excited. Could be they're trying to touch the hem of God's gown. Who knows? It could be for they're reaching for the money they've thrown up in the air before. Children's story. We'll do another Richard Scarry. This one is, I just kind of stumbled on it at the last minute, a little appropriate if you've been watching the roadside stands as you drive through Dark County. The story of seeds and how they grow. Farmer Alfalfa grows all kinds of vegetables on his farm. Best of all, he likes to grow sweet, sweet corn. Last summer, when it was time to plant corn, Alfalfa poured the bag of corn seeds into the corn planter, which actually looks kind of like the one I started out with in 1960. Don't spill. He planted the seeds in straight rows in his cornfield. The hot sun shone down, and after a while, the tiny green plants popped up. The corn was starting to grow. Rain fell on the plants, and soon ears of corn grew on the corn stalks. Then, after many days of sun and rain, Alfalfa opened an ear of corn. He wanted to see if his field of corn was ready to be picked. It was. The corn was ripe and ready for eating. Alfalfa drove his corn picker back and forth across the cornfield. The ears of corn were picked from the stalks and dumped in a wagon. And actually, if you've been down south, they actually have corn pickers for ear corn. which the corn pickers that we always use stripped the husks and everything off, and you had just a bare ear, which was way too rough for ear corn. We planted field corn for animals. But they actually have, because I was imagining people out in the field pulling them down by the ear like they used to do in the 1800s. But they actually do have pickers. Alfalfa drove his corn picker back and forth across the field. The ears of corn were picked from the stalks and dumped into a wagon. Each of their ear of corn has many seed kernels. Alfalfa knew that he would need seeds to plant at the next corn planting time. So he put some corn kernels in a bag to save for planting, and he kept some ears to eat himself, which tells us what about Richard Scarry? He doesn't know anything about modern farming practices because all the corn now is hybrids and it won't grow true. If you plant seeds from what you harvest, you won't get what you planted. You'll get some kind of unusual hybrid from someplace else. So you're trapped into buying seeds from the seed companies. They still do have native seeds, particularly like wheat and soybeans that you can plant and harvest and grow your own, but they don't have the productivity and they don't have the disease resistance of the newer ones. But some people, yes.
So when you plant seed, you don't know how you're getting?
If you planted seeds that you harvested, in other words, if you took the tomato seeds that you harvested and pulled those seeds out and planted them, you may get some of those tomatoes. You may get tomatoes that are weird shapes or weird colors or weird flavors, or maybe don't even have tomatoes. The same way with sweet corn. Like you have bicolored sweet corn, you have yellow sweet corn, you have white sweet corn. That's all genetically bred at Purdue and places like that. And the seed corn is specifically, if you've seen, does anybody know what tasseling is? If you've seen anybody that grows seed corn, they go out and cut the tassels, which is the male sperm for corn, and what they do is cut those off so the tassels from that corn doesn't get into the silk. The silk on the corn ear, that's the female receptive where the stuff, the pollen goes down to fertilize it. They cut all those off so they can't self-fertilize. So that's how the genetics has been changed. They put bags around them and actually fertilize it with the pollen that they want to have fertilize it, and that's how you create a cross. Yes?
My children used to be tassel corn in the summer. And the roads, of course, were wide then.
Yes,
You couldn't do that
so they
now.
could get through them. And there used to be, I forget the name of it, right there on 571
Decal.
going into Greenfield.
Decal.
Yeah, there used to be DeKalb there, and there used to be another one,
Yeah.
which we used to buy actually when I lived in northern Indiana. We used to buy seed corn.
Downing's out here.
Yeah, we used to buy seed corn from this plant down here, but that's what they do. They'd hire high school kids to sit on a little rack and they'd drive a tractor through and they'd detassel the corn. That's part of the process. So, he put the rest in his little old truck to sell to Grocer Cat. His truck is falling apart. Well, that's the end of that truck. It collapsed as he got to Grocer Cat's, and he gave Grocer Cat the corn, and Grocer Cat gave him the money. And then, with the money he earned from growing corn, Alfalfa bought a shiny new truck. The pig family went to Grocer Cat's store. Pigs just love corn. And let's say nobody can buy a brand new truck with the money they earned from 1 year's corn, beans, or wheat. I can tell you that too. They bought lots of corn and took it home for supper. They ate and they ate and they ate until there was no more left except one little tiny seed of corn. Mama Pig said to Harry, "Finish your supper." Harry asked if he could plant the little tiny seed instead of eating it, and Mama agreed. He planted the seed in the earth, the sun shone hot and the rain fell, and after a while a tiny green plant popped up. The plant grew and grew. One day Alfalfa came to visit. "My goodness," he said, "Harry has grown the best corn I've ever seen. I am sure he will grow up to be a very good farmer." Harry was very pleased. What do you suppose the odds were of a seed having been cooked in the pot and boiled, growing when you plant it?
Yeah. Not good.
Pretty much nil.
Not good.
So,
This
Richard
refers-
Scarry?
This refers to picking the sweet corn
Yes.
before it's dried out and everything.
Yes. Yeah, you have to pick sweet corn, and you've seen it in the store, and you've seen the sweet corn that you really don't want to buy because it's been in there for a week and it's all pale and shriveled. But it's still good eating because I'm an aficionado. I eat sweet corn every day in the summer if I can get it. And one little other thing, and it's kind of a sad thing to note, a lot of the farmers market are selling locally grown sweet corn. The ears are about like this, and they're sweet, but they're little tiny ears, and they're selling it for like $5 a dozen. you can go to Walmart and get sweet corn picked in Florida and driven up in one day. The ears are about this big for like 20 cents or 30 cents an ear. So as much as I would like to support the local farmers, I'm not paying $5 a dozen for half the size of the commercially grown sweet corn. So what we have to do with that, what you can. So that's our children's story. Joys and concerns. And this slide is just the attitudes of prayer, and most of these, I don't even know what they are. I don't think you can, well, you might be able to read them if you're close enough. Ram, Namaste. Namaste I recognize from yoga. Rukyu, Ardha, Utansa, Julia, Yulsa, Varisajana, Sujol. I didn't have a chance to look these up to see what they were, but I thought it was a pretty interesting picture. Joys and concerns. I'll repeat the virus scare. I've heard people, the anti-vaccination people and the anti-mask people say, oh, the CDC doesn't know what they do and they keep changing their mind. Folks, that's what science is. As new facts arise, you adjust your activity, you adjust your behavior to fit the facts. When the president came out and said you don't have to wear a mask inside if you've been vaccinated, the virus count was down. Now the virus count is growing everywhere, particularly in the states where the people are unvaccinated. And Dark County is one of those places. There's like 20 or 30%. So I expect our numbers to grow exponentially within the next few weeks. Then the CDC changes and said the virus is spreading. Even if you've had the vaccination, you need to wear a mask because you can get infected. You can carry the virus particles. You can spread them to other people, the children who are not allowed to be vaccinated yet. And there are more children showing up in ICUs and hospital beds. So science says pay attention, change as the facts change on the situation, and adjust your behavior to what makes sense, to what's common sense, not just what politics tells you. Yes?
I have two concerns. One extends from the coronavirus and the infection. I'm hoping that despite the unfortunate circumstances of the increase in the infection rate, that perhaps we can be less political in looking at this whole thing. And again, even if you don't totally agree, at least be open-minded to that. And maybe we as people can encourage others to do that without being politically or confrontational. I think that's needed. I think epidemiology is taken us far and wide. Vaccine development has taken us far and wide. We still have a challenge ahead of us. My other concern is worldwide hunger. We sort of take that for granted. In some places in the world, there are children and adults starving. The latest one, of course, is Tigray, the Tigray in the area of Ethiopia. And estimated at least 100,000 children facing not just malnutrition, but starvation in this world today. Let us hope that not only can our government and our diplomatic forces, and thanks to Jeff Feltman and others for doing that, but let's hope that humanitarian efforts can penetrate those political differences and feed those in need.
Yes. And we need to mention Haiti, which is still in turmoil after the assassination of his president, which is you start to hear more and more facts. He was a little problematic as a president. He kept eliminating the Senate, the legislature, he kept changing the governors to people who supported him, and it looked like he was moving toward a dictatorship, which does not justify assassination by any stretch of the imagination, but it also exemplifies what a terrible situation has been going on in Haiti for years and years and years, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. But we've thrown billions of dollars there, and it's all been basically stolen. I don't know what the answer is, other than just taking the country over, which nobody would accept. So keep Haiti in your thoughts and prayers.
I read a quote the other day that says, during the polio and smallpox crisis, we didn't reach herd immunity because the vaccine worked.
Because, yeah, we didn't have enough people immune.
Everybody took the vaccine
Yep.
then. Yeah.
And now we're finding that some of the people who had the early were infected like a year and a half ago are getting reinfected with the new variant. So herd immunity may not be on the horizon no matter what we do. We may have to go to the vaccines all the way through. One more concern, I told you about Curly last week. He blew a tendon. We had an ultrasound done. It's about a partial tear, about 4 inches long, which is a huge tear. So we took him to Ohio State, the veterinary college at Ohio State, which that was a trip and a half. Actually, I can't read it to you. I'll bring it in the bulletin next week. They have a prayer for horses, which I thought was really, really remarkable. We had a vet there look at him, do another ultrasound. We injected him with spun down plasma, which means they take blood out, they spin it down, they take the plasma out, and then they inject it right in the wound site. And we took stem cells from the sternum, and in horses, unlike people, there are undifferentiated stem cells in the bone marrow that you can spin down and then grow in a culture medium in a petri dish. And we're going to attempt to inject that back into the wound site, and hopefully we'll get Curly back on the track by the end of the year or by next year, and he can earn back some of the money we're spending on fixing it up.
And light a candle for Clayton Murphy.
Light a candle for Curly.
Continues to
Yes.
run us on.
Okay, our message, and talking about Namaste, this is a yoga pose. What do we pray for, or for what do we pray? Some weeks ago, the students of Pramanasa Yogananda, the teacher widely credited with bringing yoga and yoga science to the West, approached me to write an article on prayer, coincident with their new upcoming annual week-long self-realization fellowship convocation. Well, I bet they didn't get that on a little short bullet. An exploration into the subject of prayer reveals prayer to be considerably more complex than the stereotypical image we have of the ardent believer, fervently asking forth pleas for help, forgiveness, or for some other momentary pressing need. Prayer is not just a going out, but also a going in. And it is a practice woven deeply into the fabric of global culture, a rich tapestry of science, psychology, metaphysics, and of course, faith and spiritual sojourn. As a practice, prayer is the setting of an intention. It is not a plea, but a resolution. And that resolution takes many forms. Whatever that form, the psychology that underlies prayer issues forth from two fairly distinct perspectives. On the one hand, God, or the object of prayer, may be represented as an external construct of the ego or something out there. On the other, God may be represented as an interior archetype or something in here. The various spiritual and religious traditions, major and minor, dominant and new, each fall primarily into one of these two containers, and then include some lesser blending of the other. This fundamental psychological framework subsequently influences and informs the form that prayer and meditation take within each of the various spiritual traditions. And some will say that meditation is just a form of prayer, or prayer is just a form of meditation. And if you've watched Catholics recite the Catechism, you can see how they can connect prayer to meditation. The major Western traditions, such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, subscribe in large measure to the out there construct. So God is primarily prayed to. The mystic traditions associated with each of these larger traditions, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, and Sufism, respectively, lend the in-here aspect to this particular container, resonating with the notion of the self as divine. So Gnosticism is an interior interpretation of Christianity. Kabbalah is an interior representation of Judaism. Is everybody familiar with Gnosticism and Kabbalah? You want me to expand? All right, I'll expand on that in the future. We'll bring those up. Kabbalah can be pretty interesting. A lot of people have taken that and kind of twisted it into some kind of evil art. And then, where am I? Sufism, I'm sure I've told you about Sufism, where they spin. That's a form of physical prayer, and that actually, we'll talk about that a little bit later. There is a combination of prayer that is physical and mental. Let's see, that they respectively lend the in-here aspect to the particular container, resonating with the notion of self as divine. The major Eastern traditions, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, issue forth from the other side of this coin, subscribing in large measure to the in-here construct. So prayer from this perspective is something more introspective and akin to meditation. Within each of these traditions, there are also reflected varying aspects of out there, encompassed by things like the Hindu and Buddhist pantheons, or the Tao begetting yin and yang, the begetting the I Ching, in a parallel to Genesis. Smaller traditions, both East and probably we need to go through those two, the I Ching and Taoism and Yin and Yang. We'll go through all of those later. Smaller traditions, both East and West, such as Wicca, Jainism, Bon, Native American shamanism, Shinto, Voodoo, and Santeria, reflect a similar set of balances within their fundamental psychological underpinnings. Let's see. Wicca, we all know what Wicca is. Wicca, that's the pagan example of pagan worship. Jainism is an Indian religion where they revere all life. They won't even step on a bug. Bon, I have no idea what that is. I'll have to look that up. Native American shamanism, we know what that is. Shinto is the Japanese, is a form of Japanese prayer and religion. Voodoo, that's the one you've heard about in the movies from Jamaica with sticking pins in dolls. And Santeria is another South American or Central American, Eastern, the islands of like Bermuda and through there. It's similar to Voodoo, but has different variations and imported from Africa. We'll go through those later too. Witness the great spirit of Native American Sioux tradition, which also emphasizes the relationship between the people and the land, anthropomorphizing the taka and the buffalo. Similarly, Wicca relies heavily on the practitioner's relationship to the five elements as aspects of the self, but regularly calls the goddess into the ritual circle, while Voodoo and Santeria each hold close associations with the Christian tradition. And they were formed basically when the slaves were brought from Africa. They brought part of their own religion and they blended it with the religion of Christianity that was forced on them by the planters. No matter the form of prayer, particular to a tradition, one type of prayer is ubiquitous to all prayers of blessing. Again, speaking to the psychological aspect, blessing is when prayer, no matter its antecedent, moves from the egocentric praying for me to the ethnocentric praying for you and us, and the geocentric praying for all of us. After all, one of the most ubiquitous terms and blessings in the English language is goodbye, which is shorthand for God be with ye. Goodbye. If you spell it out, G-O-O-D-B-Y, and then ends with Y-E. So God be with ye. So every time we say goodbye, we're basically doing a Christian blessing. An interesting bit of science attached to this ethnocentric and geocentric evolution of prayer comes out of the Duke University Medical Center, where a study found that within a group of 150 cardiac patients who received alternative post-operative therapy treatment, the subgroup who also received intercessory prayer, they were prayed for, had the highest success rate within the entire cohort. The fascinating thing about the study is that it was a double blind. Neither the researchers nor those on the receiving end of the intercessory prayer knew that these patients were being prayed for, suggesting an intervening variable. Now, when they say the patients didn't know they were being prayed for, I have a question, because if a patient knows that someone is praying for them, I can see where that would give them support. If they are telling me that someone prayed for these patients without the patients knowing it and the patients improved, I would find that highly interesting and think we should start a prayer corps going. Now, at the hospital, we used to do that. When I worked at the hospital, we used to do that routinely. We would ask patients if they wanted to have prayer before they went to surgery and when they came back from surgery. And if they said they did, not all of us, I mean, those of us who have a Christian tradition and partially those of us whose wife is a minister and knows the prayer, we would pray for those patients, and hopefully that helped them with a little bit of peace of mind. A comparable double-blind study conducted at San Francisco's General Hospital's coronary care unit demonstrated similar results. those patients prayed for showed significantly diminished need for imminent critical care, maintenance medications, and heroic measures, as well as witnessing fewer deaths, again suggesting an intervening variable. Clearly, the intervening variable implied by these studies isn't the case for God. Not exactly clearly, but I can see where you can draw that conclusion. It does suggest, however, some relationships between the state of consciousness experienced by those praying and the subjective experience of those prayed for. And what they're suggesting here is it's possible the idea of praying by the practitioner, in other words, the nurse or the doctor doing the praying, does tend to focus your attention on what you're doing. You're not daydreaming and making mistakes. Perhaps the prayer by the person providing the care is focusing on their attention on the patient, and that's the reason you have a positive outcome. Because as we all know, mistakes do happen. Clearly, the intervening variable, oops, I missed that one. From a metaphysical perspective, what we are talking about here is a reciprocal resonance that has been demonstrated to exist between the states of consciousness. Specifically, casual states of consciousness, prayer, meditation, and deep dreamless sleep. The quantum field, which we like to call reality, which I've never heard reality called a quantum field before, described by quantum physics. For a more practical perspective, the notion of this relationship leads us to consider both the individual and collective experience of prayer and the potential influence it can have on our experience both in and of the world. Prayer, like meditation, influences our state of mind, which in turn influences our state of body. It reduces the experience of anxiety, it elevates a depressed mood, lowers blood pressure, stabilizes sleep patterns, and impacts autonomic functions like digestion and breathing. Further, in inducing or influencing our states of body and mind, prayer and meditation also influence our thinking. This prompts a shift in the habits of the mind and subsequently habits and patterns of behavior. These changes in turn and over time induce changes in the brain, further influencing our subjective and objective experience of the world and how we participate in it. In other words, prayer and meditation changes how you interact with the world. And if you've watched people who are very adept practicers of that, you can see when they slow their breathing, slow their heartbeat, their blood pressure goes down, they're basically healthier people. Does all this sound familiar? It should, because what we're really talking about here is neuroplasticity, a topic that spiritual teachers like Thomas Merton, Baal Shev Tov, and Paramahansa Yogananda expounded upon extensively in their discussion of prayer and meditation long before we had the language to describe it. So if prayer and meditation influence the body-mind, which in turn influences our experience of the world and the manner in which we participate in it, what happens if you get a group of folks praying or meditating together? Logic dictates one is good, two are better, and one has only to witness the orgastic unions of Baptist congregation or the quiet solemnity of an Islamic salat to recognize the power and potential of collective prayer, as well as its larger social impact. With collective prayer, we move from the egocentric to the ethno and geocentric, generalizing the individual experience of the ethnocentric and geocentric prayer to the collective, along with its associated motive of neuroplastic changes and evident influence of intercessory prayer. It becomes clear where an effort like self-realization, fellowship's convocation finds its intention and inspiration. And what she's saying is, when people pray in a group, whether it's Catholic catechism or whether it's the Muslim prayer on Fridays where the entire group kneels in unison, or whether it's the Christian hands raised, and there are positive and negatives, that she doesn't mention the negatives, and she doesn't really go into the positives very thoroughly. Some of the reasons that we have people committing suicide bombings in the Muslim faith is because as a group they pray together, they become devout believers, and they become brainwashed into whatever the leader is telling them. This also happens in Christianity, and it also has seemed to happen with us in politics without even any religion being attached to it. When the great leader tells you something, you just suck it in and regurgitate it, whether it makes any sense or not. Okay, remarking on prayer, meditation, and the power of intention, the Paramahansa Yogananda and his contemporaries drew not only on the core of spirituality, but also the fundamental principles of psychology and specifically neuroplasticity to describe the transformation of the interior landscape. The exterior expression of that interior transformation extends the intention of transformation outward with prayer and more specifically collective prayer, providing in part and literally the vehicle, to quote Mahatma Gandhi, for being the change we wish to see in the future. In other words, you live out the change you want to see. You live out in your life and the lives of your friends and associates, the lives that you want to see everyone else live in the future. William James, the father of Western psychology, in 1902, defined the spiritual experience as states of higher consciousness, which are induced by efforts to understand the general principles or structure of the world through one's inner experience. At the core of his view of spirituality is what we might call connectedness, which refers to the fact that individual goals can be truly realized only in the context of the whole, one's relationship to the world and to others. In other words, you don't understand where you are and where you're going until you understand how you're connected to the society, the greater society at large, how you fit into the group. And that's accepting that everyone needs to be in a group. Traditionally, the spiritual state has been described as divine, achievable through contemplative and embodied practices such as prayer, meditation, rhythmic rituals. And this higher state of consciousness and connection has been reported in many spiritual traditions, ranging from Buddhism, Sufism, and Judaism to Christianity. However, most recent neuroscientific research shows the same state can be achieved by secular practices too. Scientific and creative epiphanies and their accompanying ecstatic states are characterized by a sense of unity and bliss, are similar to religious experiences, while both involving a higher state of presence and observation. Many geniuses, such as Albert Einstein, the mathematician, Srinivasa Rajadhan, reported spiritual-like states during the revelations or breakthroughs. But these don't have to be the rare experiences of a chosen few. They can be reached in daily life. As the Nobel laureate and poet Crenshaw Mills put it, descriptions demand intense observation, so intense that the very veil of everyday habit falls away, and what we paid no attention to because it struck us as so ordinary is revealed as miraculous. And in the modern age, we achieve this through the modern miracle of chemistry, or known as mind-altering drugs. Now you can take a drug that will give you a revelation. And some of the new research says some of these drugs can actually reduce, like PTSD, the trauma that soldiers go through, or actually anybody who's involved in a traumatic experience can relive and relive and relive the frightening nightmares. They've been given LSD, and it's opened their mind and allowed them to live through those experiences without all the traumatic experience that goes with it, which is a pretty big revelation. She is not a neuroscientist. No, she is a neuroscientist, and among other things, she studies the way spiritual states are reflected in the brains and other parts of the body. Spiritual practices have been shown to be closely linked to self-awareness, empathy, and a sense of connectedness, all of which can be correlated with the frequency of brain waves as measured by EEGs. Studies using EEGs have demonstrated how fragmented or out of step our whole brain activity can be much of the time, suggestive of conflicts between our behavior, thinking, feeling, and communication. On the other hand, expert mediators demonstrate more harmonious brain waves, which can be indicative of greater synchrony or connectivity within and across different neural areas. In short, spirituality, similar to love, has the physiological effects in the body and brain, and the provides a window on these changes. So science can actually show, when they talk about the alpha and the delta waves in your brain, when people are meditating, they can see the amplification of the alpha waves, which is a calming effect on the body. And some places call that biofeedback, where you can actually learn if you have phobias, you're afraid to get in airplanes or elevators or small spaces, you can, using biofeedback and working on those alpha waves, can train your brain to relax during those stimulating situations. What's more, research suggests we can do more than just measure this kind of activity. We can also train our brains to behave in a more aware way by engaging in activities that facilitate greater connection or neural synchronization. Imagine a large group of brain cells singing together. Has been found to follow the practice of different contemplative paradigms, such as meditation and prayer, creating, as it were, slower ocean waves, growing calmer and calmer. One way of achieving a state in which the brain works in a more congruent way, adopting a more global perspective. Other findings point to a psychological consequence of this state. Greater neuronal synchronization tends to enable greater ability to make moral judgments and problem-solve creativity. In other words, there are actual benefits to these training practices. Neuronal synchronization also correlates with feeling of more self-connected, which can in turn further increase empathy, creativity, and social effectiveness. For instance, the psychologist and author of Insight wrote in the Harvard Business Review that people with greater self-awareness are more confident, make sounder decisions, build stronger relationships, and communicate more effectively. The self-aware also receive more promotions, and have more satisfied employees and achieve more profitable companies. Capitalism always manages to sneak in. We can transcend the here and now to create more spherical life that changes our focus from basic needs and fears to other values. You might be concerned that taking a neuroscientific approach to profound, ineffable spiritual experience is reductionist or anti-positive, we can say. But another perspective is the scientific exploration of such experiences could reveal the mechanism enabling us all to achieve these states, even in the most mundane moments, such as waiting in traffic. Scientific discovery can turn seemingly subjective experiences into unifying understanding. Simply put, I've seen how spirituality can be experienced in the lab. Let me share some examples. Most of my research over the past 2 decades is linked to movement meditation called Quattro Motor Training, QMT. And this is something that I want to look into that demands both coordination and mindfulness. Practitioners alternate between dynamic movements and static postures while dividing their attention between their body in the present moment and its location in space. In other words, they move and then they stop and contemplate the movement. Then they move and then they stop and contemplate the movement. QMT requires a connection between the external world and the inner realm by requiring the participant to be intentionally aware of both the inner and outer worlds simultaneously. And what's the Chinese movement? There's a thing that China has been vigorously opposing, where the people are in the park doing rhythmic movements on different poses. I can't think of the name of it right now.
Tai Chi.
What is it?
Tai Chi.
Might be 5G. There's another name, but it's right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't come up with it. But that is an example, and you can get instructional tapes at the library on how to do it. It's specified movements, rhythmic movements, which focuses your mind. That's essentially what we're talking about here. In our research, we found that QMT improved cognitive flexibility, not just physical flexibility, but flexibility in your brain. For example, in thinking about a simple glass, most people will associate it with the act of drinking. But following QMT training, additional worlds of content can open up. The glass can be viewed as the holy grail or a hat. In fact, our study shows that a 7-minute QMT session increased cognitive flexibility by 25% compared with other simpler kinds of movement or verbal training. What's more, EEG measures showed that the enhanced cognitive flexibility associated with QMT training was also accompanied by increased brain synchronization of the kind previously related to relaxation, attention, and the flow state. Some might say QMT also fosters spirituality. What else helps to produce natural synchronization? Perhaps surprisingly, being in a space similar to a sensory deprivation chamber with little external stimulation also imparts on neuronal synchronization. That was the idea behind the QVO chamber. UOVO is Italian for egg, describing the space's shape. One of the leading teachers of meditation, based on the spherical model of consciousness, this model describes a spherical matrix that maps onto our suggestive experiences, ranging from automatic, ordinary habits to higher states of consciousness achieved in contemplative practices. My colleagues and I have found that OVO immersion leads to increased neuronal synchronization in the insula. That's the part of the brain related to empathy, as well as bodily self-awareness. This in turn was accompanied by an increased sense of absorption, akin to the feeling you get when overwhelmed by the beauty of the sunset as you fully and voluntarily engage your attention in the experience. And who hasn't had that experience, seeing something of extraordinary beauty or peace or stillness and feeling that sense of beauty and awe kind of wash over your body? Evidently, you can achieve that intentionally. Absorption is also closely related to spirituality, meditation, and empathy, and likely because all involve openness to self-altering experiences and voluntarily increasing awareness. When we lose it, for instance, what exactly are we losing? Nothing less than ourselves. Most of us don't have access to an external egg chamber. We can place ourselves at the center of our own sphere in daily life. By rooting ourselves, listening to our highest aspirations, and paying close attention to our breathing, to the people we love, and the present moment, we can transcend the here and now to create a more spherical life that changes our focus from basic needs and values and fears to values. In this sense, spirituality can be seen as actions that are not separate from daily life, but rather congruently connected to its different aspects: the body, the family, career, friendships, relationships, finance, and society. In both examples, the latter option includes engaging a more mature, present part of ourselves in the current once-in-a-lifetime moment, both connected to the experience of the sights and sounds and sense. This is the kind of experience some call spirituality, namely the interconnectedness of being. In contrast, each time we react involuntarily, we aren't anchored to our center, but controlled by the more automatic state, not chosen by us. Therefore, we're less connected both within ourselves and to the greater good. And what she's referring to is, and I missed that part, imagine you're driving and notice the sun setting. Is your next thought about the traffic, or are you awed by the glorious sunset and the daily planetary dance we all share? Now imagine the same drive. Someone recklessly cuts you off and zooms away. Is your first reaction to get upset and start chasing them, risking yourself and others, or do you remain calm with your heart rate at the same as it was before the car overtook you? This is a real-life example that we're dividing meditation and real-life experience for prayer. Recently, while preparing for an online conference, I shared some of my data showing increasing greater levels of relaxation among novice, intermediate, and expert meditators. My curious 17-year-old daughter said, "Mom, I know how to meditate. I'm an intermediate practitioner, right?" I replied, "Well, as you see by these graphs, there is a big difference between knowing how to meditate and actually practicing it regularly. Imagine some stairways that you can climb to reach the sky. You have the means to get there, but now you have to keep climbing." Which is why we are constantly told prayer is not something you use on an occasional basis. That's why nuns, priests, novitiates, monks, saints, the people in the church who practice prayer multiple times, 5 and 6 times a day, they get up early in the morning, they stay up late at night, prayer becomes an ingrown tradition that involves straining your brain to think in that sort of a fashion, to react in that sort of a fashion. So, comments. She's pretty involved and pretty scientific, but I like the parameters, I like the expanse of the information she covered, and we'll try and reduce that down into something a little more practical as we go along. One of those ways is when you come and leave the sanctuary, or as you're going about your daily practice, think about the people in the church who you've seen or you haven't seen, and wish them well in their daily lives, and wish them support if you're aware that they need it. Okay? Time for the offering. The grasses stilled with light teach stillness. Old stones suffer with memory, teaching suffering. Blossoms humble with beginning, teach humility. Parents of all manners of species secure their young, teaching caring. Ants crawl on the ground, teaching limitation. Leaves dying in the fall teach resignation. Seeds in the spring teach regeneration. Melting snow forgets its life, teaching us to forget ours. Dry fields weep in the rain, teaching us to remember kindness. And we will repeat this on occasion, something that we need to learn as we go along. Sweet hour of prayer. This is the first Sunday of the month, so feel free to make a donation to Fish if you wish. The Fish receptacle is up here. Yes. And as everybody grasps the importance of our slide, taking a knee in America. On the one side, you have Colin Kaepernick taking a knee in protest of police violence. And on the other side, you have Derek Chauvin taking a knee exemplifying police violence. Which one is an exemplar of our patriotic values and constitutional rights? Interesting cartoon. Our closing hymn is 411, Part in Peace.
Amen.
Our closing words. Actually, this slide is the Redwood Forest in California. That is a truly spiritual place. I don't know how you can walk through that and not have a spiritual experience and expand from the inside, expand out to include that geocentric, looking for peace in the entire world. Dear earth that brought us forth, whose beauty and wonder is all we know of heaven, thank you, earth, for wooden drakes and herons, and for the waters and wetlands that support them and us. Postlude, his eye is upon the sparrow. His eye is on the sparrow, which reminds me of another concern. There's been a mass die-off of songbirds in the Midwest. I don't know if you're aware of that. Thousands and thousands are being found dead. So the recommendation is please do not put out feeding stations for bird feed because then the birds congregate and pass whatever this unknown disease is among each other. They're still trying to figure out what exactly is going on, which would be a mass catastrophe if we lose our songbirds. So that ends our service on an unfortunately unhappy note. Stay safe, wear your masks. The virus is not over with. Contemplate, think, meditate, be aware of your surroundings and the people you see every day and those people who you haven't seen for a while. And we hope to see you next week.